Blue Horizon Lou Part 1, The Glass and the Smoke. Charlotte Cross lived by the cold law of probability. From her glass office overlooking Sydney's circular quay, she calculated disaster for a living. As the senior risk assessment executive for a global insurance conglomerate, she converted human tragedy and unpredictable weather into bloodless data models. She didn't trust intuition. She trusted numbers. That was why she was inside a concrete tanned glass autonomous monitoring outpost, deep in the rugged heart of the Blue Mountains, auditing the network's new AI bushfire containment grid. Luke Harrison, on the other hand, lived by the wind. Luke was a rugged, intuitive aerial firefighting drone coordinator and wilderness rescue operator. He didn't care for spreadsheets. He knew how the eucalyptus forests breathed, how a sudden shift in the valley wind could turn a spot fire into an absolute inferno. He used technology as a weapon, not a predictive luxury. Your automated fire models are dangerously clinical, Charlotte, Luke said, leaning against the metal console, arms crossed over his tactical vest. He spoke with a slow Australian drawl that rasped her nerves. The computer thinks a forest is a flat surface. It doesn't factor in the dry fuel in the gullies or the raw temper of a roaring southerly buster. Charlotte didn't look up from her tablet. The algorithm accounts for 98% of historical variance, Mr. Harrison. It minimizes human error. Your reliance on gut instinct is a liability. Luke let out a low, dry chuckle, stepping closer. He smelled of wood smoke, crushed leaves, and heavy leather. He was a weathered presence that made the high-tech outpost feel incredibly small. Well, sweetheart, that remaining 2% of variance is exactly where the bush kills you. Part 2. The Red Loop. Variance arrived 20 minutes later. A dry lightning strike down the ridge ignited a volatile pocket of eucalyptus. Fed by a violent updraft from the canyon floor, the fire didn't crawl, it exploded. Within minutes, a towering wall of white-hot fire raced up the ridge, cutting into the grid's automated perimeter. Inside the outpost, the central console suddenly erupted into a cascade of neon crimson alerts. Critical level met, unpredicted thermal event, AI containment grid, failure, packet loss, automated protocol initiating outpost lockdown, blast doors sealed from external sensors. A heavy groan echoed as massive steel shutters slammed down over the windows, plunging the interior into a shadow-filled darkness lit only by pulsing red emergency lights. The main ventilation fans whined down to a dead stop, causing the internal temperature to skyrocket instantly. Charlotte's data feeds went completely black. Her screen flashed a sterile message, "Connection lost." The system locked the doors from the outside, Charlotte said, her corporate composure fracturing as panic clawed at her throat. It thinks the perimeter is secure, but the fire is right on top of us. We are trapped in a concrete oven. I told you the machine lacked a pulse, Luke said, his voice hardening into absolute competence. He reached for his satellite radio, but the intense thermal ionization from the fire produced nothing but deafening static. "We're on our own," Luke muttered, his eyes narrowing in the crimson gloom. "The ear is going to thin out fast once the fire front hits the roof. We need a manual override and an escape route through that valley right now." Part 3. The thermal sink heat inside the bunker grew visceral and oppressive. Charlotte's chest heaved, sweat trickling down the back of her neck, her skin flushing under the flashing red strobes. Stripped down to a thin tank top, her hair was damp and clinging to her temples. Luke ripped off his heavy tactical vest, his broad shoulders glistening in the dark. He stepped directly into her personal space, his large hands catching her trembling shoulders, forcing her to look into his steady gaze. "Charlotte, look at me," Luke commanded. The physical friction between them was electric, a raw chemistry born of survival. The automated grid is blind, but we aren't. I need your analytical mind to rewrite the localized sensor parameters, and you need my eyes to read the fire. We sink or swim together. Charlotte looked at the hard line of his jaw, the unyielding protective instinct radiating from him. The panic in her mind cleared, replaced by a sudden focus. "Show me the hardware." They dropped to their knees before the manual bypass panel beneath the console. The space was incredibly cramped, forcing their bodies flush against one another. Every movement was a tactile collision, the fabric of his trousers brushing against her bare legs. The heavy heat of his breathing mixing with hers as Charlotte pulled away the wiring harness. Luke launched his tactical reconnaissance drone through a manual emergency exhaust vent. The raw drone feed flickered onto a small handheld monitor between them, showing a chaotic nightmare of rolling black smoke and leaping orange tongues of fire cutting through the valley. The AI thinks the northern ridge is passable. But look at the smoke color, Luke muttered, his chest pressing against her shoulder as he pointed at the screen. That's dark, oily eucalyptus smoke. The canopy is crowning there. It's a death trap. But look at the pressure metrics on the southern flank, Charlotte said, her fingers rapidly tracing the raw sensor code on the auxiliary terminal. She leaned back against his chest, using his solid frame as an anchor against the violent vibrations of the mountain thunder outside. The sensors report high heat, but the barometric pressure is dropping. It's an optical illusion created by the canyon draft. The fire hasn't crossed the rock shelf yet. There is a clear corridor of cold air. Luke looked from the screen to her face, a fierce grin breaking through the soot on his features. Brilliant. You found the loop, part 4. The manual path there in the bunker was running out, growing acrid. The external temperature readings breached 300 degrees. We have one shot at this, Luke said, his voice low and incredibly intimate. He wrapped his hand over hers on the mechanical override lever. The contrast was stunning, her soft, trembling fingers locked beneath his rough, callous grip. When I throw the switch, the pneumatic seals will burst. The chopper is parked 50 meters out on the rock pad. The air column above it is clean, but we have to run through the smoke line to reach it. Charlotte looked into his eyes, finding an absolute sanctuary in his gaze. I'm not looking at the metrics anymore. Luke, I'm looking at you. Hold your breath, he whispered together. They threw their combined weight against the lever with an explosive hiss of releasing pressure. The heavy steel blast doors popped open. A wall of intense heat and gray ash blasted into the room. Luke didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, pulling her out into the roaring, orange-tinged nightmare of the mountain ridge. The sky was a bruised, apocalyptic purple, filled with flying embers. The wind was a physical force, screaming through the trees. Luke ran interference, using his massive frame to shield her from flying debris as they lunged toward the cabin of his rugged, twin-engine rescue helicopter. They scrambled inside the cockpit, slamming the doors shut against the smoke. Luke's hands flew across the switches, bringing the turbines to screaming life. The rotors cut through the turbulent air, lifting the chopper off the pad just as a tongue of fire licked across the concrete. Charlotte leaned forward, her hands guiding his on the collective stick. Using her handheld monitor to map the precise coordinates of the cold air corridor she had calculated. Now, Luke, turn 30 degrees south. Trust the pressure drop. Luke threw the chopper into a steep, banking turn, diving directly through a gap in the smoke wall. The air suddenly cleared, shifting from a choking orange-gray to a brilliant, clean blue as they broke through the thermal perimeter into the clear mountain sky below them. The burning valley receded into a distant, harmless scar on the landscape. Luke leveled out the aircraft, setting the autopilot toward the cool horizon of the coast. He turned his head, his eyes locking onto Charlotte. She was covered in ash, her breathing still shallow, but her eyes were bright and completely transformed. Without a word, Luke reached across the console, his hand catching the back of her neck, pulling her toward him. The kiss was a raw release of all the heat and terror they had left behind, a deep, unyielding surrender that carried the wild, untamable rhythm of the bush. Charlotte wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, letting go of the data, letting go of the predictions, completely content to be lost in the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of his arms.